Stop now, we are over time.
Smokers. The person who started working on nicotine and smoking in 1975, which coincidentally was the year I was born, the great Karl Fagerstrom, who needs no real introduction because I'm sure everyone knows him.
Thank you very much, thank you very much, and more so for the invitation to come to beautiful Greece, particularly this time of the year when it's not too hot for a Swede. The microphone is on, you can all hear? Yes, okay, fine. So let's see then, if we can advance the slides here a little bit. Okay, we go here then. So, no, it doesn't work. There we go. Oops. There we go. So this is my relevant disclosure, but I also have consulted for at least a dozen of pharma companies, but I don't think they are relevant in the topic of today. So certainly we already know that harm reduction can be controversial. That's no news. But I think there is less controversy, for example, among preventing car collisions. We have the airbags, no one complains. We try to segregate car and bike lanes, fine, no conflict. Unhealthy food, we are turning into more fibers, less of free saturated acids, trans fatty acids, etc. We want to avoid fires, and certainly side effects from medication. That is also a kind of a harm reduction, and many new medications today don't really have increased efficacy but decreased adverse effects. Then if we move to some other areas where it's more controversial, could be tattoo. To tattoo by itself in certain culture. Sometimes the inks can be very harmful and more or less harmful. Alcohol is a bit controversial, and particularly in Scandinavia. Here, alcohol, wine isn't alcohol, wine is wine, but with us it's alcohol. Underage exmarital sex can be also very controversial. Then we go to where we really set fire on our minds, and that is to reduce harm from either illicit drugs or licit drugs like tobacco and nicotine. There has actually been a harm reduction thing happening to caffeine also. When I was young, we were boiling the coffee, but that boiling actually created some acids that was a risk for cardiovascular disease. So there hardly no one is boiling coffee any longer to get rid of that extra risk. So I think there is a kind of a continuum of controversy. There is high controversy where we are dealing with drugs, and much less controversy or nothing when we are dealing with food to make the food less harmful. And this might help a little bit in our thinking and understanding. I suppose that more or less every culture, country, or ethnic group, they have their, whether you call them drugs or in the German language, there is a very nice name for this, Genussmittel, pleasure things in English, where sugar was included also, and coffee and alcohol. So, and for alcohol, I mean, it comes in various preparations, beer, wine, liquor, caffeine, soda, tea, coffee, nicotine in newer forms that I have not listed there. And I have caffeine there also. And it occurred to me, listening to the previous speaker, that I recently published a paper where the intention was to assess dependence across different products, particularly cigarettes and snus and caffeine, but we tried on gambling a little bit also. And what came out of that study was that tobacco was more dependence producing than caffeine. But when we asked all the subjects, we looked into those who rated themselves as very dependent. Then we had more highly dependent caffeine users in the population in Sweden than nicotine users. That is because we have relatively few tobacco users and 70% that consume caffeine. But we didn't count the sodas. Had we done that, that could have even been a higher figure. So what I would like to say with that is simply that addiction, yes, addiction is a problem. I'm not denying that. But if that is a very big problem, then we also have to address caffeine. So nicotine is certainly coming down in more or less every country in the world. And marijuana in various forms, tetrahydrocannabinol, is going up. Not only on an individual level any longer. Whole countries are actually legalizing marijuana. Canada, Uruguay, many states in the US, we are discussing in Europe. How does that happen right now? Why did not that happen 20 years ago or didn't happen yet at all? I don't know, of course, but is there communicating jars operating here? So if all those adolescents that do not find that this circumstance here is a paradise, they seek something to enjoy themselves, and now there is not so much the possibility with nicotine because tobacco had been stigmatizing. You turn to something else. As I said, I don't know, but it's something that we have to keep in mind unless we think that we can have a drug-free society. And many think so. When we deal with illicit drugs, it's almost more or less more of the same. We never reset the discussion and try new avenues because we think with the right measures we can eradicate amphetamine use and cocaine use and whatever. I think that nicotine and tobacco is an ideal area for harm reduction simply because it's used mainly, and I agree with Dr. Lehusek here, mainly nicotine. The behavior is also very important, and many smokers up to recently thought that it was just a bad behavior. The behavior is important. Pure nicotine and even unburned tobacco is not a big part of the problem, the health consequences. And we could talk long and lengthy about that and have a discussion. I don't want us to get too far there, but there are harmful effects from nicotine. It does affect the fetus and can complicate delivery. And it might have behavioral effects further up in the adolescence. There is a possibility that a very high consumption of nicotine can be a risk for type 2 diabetes. And finally, in case if there is a myocardial infarction or a stroke, it might happen to be worse if you are using nicotine than if you do not. And certainly if you do not stop after an MI, you are worse off than anyone that doesn't use tobacco or nicotine. I suppose tobacco and nicotine will not be used across the whole globe where there are no positive effects. And there could be a long list there also, but I've just mentioned it's a cognitive enhancer, a kind of particular effect that comes out as strongly and relatively homogeneous in every study. That is the attention focus, and particularly the more noisy environment, the more it sort of make a difference to close out the irrelevant stimulation. And this is important for the schizophrenics also that smoke a lot, because they are bombarded, cascaded by stimulation, and they cannot attend the way we can. So that might be one of the reasons that schizophrenics are smoking to a much larger degree, and they do not die so much from the schizophrenia as from the heart attack from smoking or lung cancer. Even smoking prevents Parkinson's disease to occur. Ulcerative colitis, not a frequent disorder, and also prevent for multiple sclerosis. And of course, there is no random thing that ballet dancers and jockey riders, they are very often smoking. it's a way to keep the weight down under control. The former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb said this a year ago. Nicotine, while highly addictive, is delivered through products on a continuum of risk, and that in order to successfully address cigarette addiction, we must make it possible for current adult smokers who still seek nicotine to get it from alternative and less harmful sources. And this is where I stay also. There is a continuum of harm. And nicotine by itself, although not healthy by any means, is far from having the harm as cigarettes do. So, but I will try to keep on time here and not go over. So I switch over now to, I would like to do a little snapshot of 4 countries where harm reduction might be in operation. The first one is Sweden and Norway, where snus is the product that have made the trick, if there is a trick. In Japan, it's the heat but not burn products, and in the UK, it is very much the electronic cigarettes, as we have already heard. So starting with Sweden. So I am also relying on Eurobarometer data here, and we see the smoking prevalence across the EU countries. And Sweden is to the very, or can I get this to, it's hard, oops. No, I pushed entirely wrong button. Okay, I don't have that many slides. So Sweden have 5-6% of daily smoking, while you see there is no country that is close to. And I go to the next one, which is mortality, and that is, of course, much more important. I mean, personally, I wouldn't care if everyone used nicotine unless it didn't come in my face. I mean, having a nicotine gum or a nicotine patch, and everyone was using it if it were not dangerous. So the reason that I'm interested and have been interested in being in this area for so long is that I like to fight the disease and death that comes with tobacco use. So again, Sweden is in the very end of the spectrum here, having fewer attributable deaths to tobacco per 1,000 people than any other country. Let's go to Japan. And in Japan, what has happened there? I'm so sorry that I cannot use the very uppermost. That's what I try, but never mind. Can you get this to function for me? So the heat, but in the middle there, right, okay. So Japan, they have used the heat but not burn, and there are 3 types of them, plume, IQOS, and glow. And they were introduced about here, and you see it even better on the figures here. If we set the cigarette consumption to 100 in 2016, it was relatively stable, but 2017 it went down to 86, 73, and 66. So a third of the cigarette market has disappeared. Poor Japan Tobacco. No one can, of course, say that this is because the heat but not burn products came on the market. We cannot infer complete causality. But there is an association, and personally, I think that these 2 products and the high use of them has contributed. If they were not used, I wouldn't have been thinking that they could have contributed to the decline. So that's something in operation, and we hope it will continue to go down for the cigarettes. Now Norway. If we look at the prevalence of smoking in Norway from, 2008, we see that it was 21 then, and it has steadily gone down to 2 years ago, 11%. Snus use has gone up during the same time. So here, pretty much a communicable yaw. So 12 plus 11 is 23. And there we had 21 plus 6, 27. It's roughly, the total tobacco use has gone down a little bit, but the shift is between two different tobacco products. Is that any good? Yeah, let's look a little bit more into the prevalence here. And now we are talking about women, young women. And in the beginning of the series here, 17% of the women were smoking. 2017, this is staggering. First, when I saw these pictures, I didn't believe them. There is 1% of young women smoking in Norway. Must be some kind of world record for the industrial world at least. But what has happened is again that the snus has gone up. So 14 plus 1 is 15, and there you have 17 plus 5, 22. Still, there is a little bit of a decline in tobacco, but the big thing is the switch between different tobacco products. So, United Kingdom, and here I'm afraid that I do have some different data than the previous speaker. First, I also wanted to alert you to the fact that the smoking cessation treatments, how well they are used, that's what we see here over time. And we see when e-cigarettes came on the market, they gained in popularity and have since 2013 been the most popular tool for stopping smoking. OTC, NRT being the second. And here we see all adults, prevalence of smoking again on this axis, all adults. And from this time series began, we have seen a steady decline, fairly good linear decline. And at the introduction of the e-cigarette, it has certainly not stopped or stalled. It goes further down and even maybe accelerates a little bit. So that suggests that it has not interfered with the natural disease direction, so to say. If we look at the young adults, 18 to 24, here the ride is a little bumpier. You see dots a little bit more all over, but the applied linear effect here is that it does go down until the e-cigarettes comes in, and if anything, it accelerates and continues to go down. That is not to say that 1 or 2 or even 100 may have a gateway effect from the electronic cigarette, but the net effect is in the other direction. And maybe we will hear more about this from speakers later in the night, but the public health in England has come out as supportive, and that's a bit unusual. The thing is that UK will be the country, the master country, where we actually can collect the proof. If other countries are making it impossible for the product to thrive, we could never collect any evidence. We could never make a scientific, well-grounded decision. So I hope at least it will have survive in the UK. So what has happened in these 3 countries, that has happened without resource-demanding interventions from doctors, nurses, and the healthcare system. It has simply been normal market mechanisms that has been happening here and operating. And I put in the last thing, which is the High Court of Quebec has been dealing or wrestling with, can you abandon, can you ban e-cigarettes? And they say that they need to have a role to prohibit them is a violation of human rights. So in summary, 40 seconds, it's difficult to get rid of drugs, whatever drugs. I mean, it's not easy. How successful has the Americans been? Was it Nixon that created the war against drugs? How many deaths have been created by that war? Probably more than drug addicts have killed themselves. Tobacco, almost ideal for harm reduction because of nicotine, is relatively benign. Tobacco harm reduction seems to me to work, at least in Sweden, and you will hear more about that in the next talk. And tobacco harm reduction can happen without costly involvement of healthcare systems. Thank you very much.